Welcome to Et Al., a podcast from Baylor University Press, where we interview authors and publishing experts to bring you the best scholarship in the fields of scriptural, historical, and theological studies, as well as the world of academic publishing. Thanks for joining us. Welcome, everybody, to Et Al., a podcast of Baylor University Press. I'm Anna Kate, and I am here today with Dr. Angel Santiago Vendrell. He was born in Arecibo, Puerto Rico. He holds a Bachelor of Arts in Theological Studies from Lee University, a Master of Divinity from Pentecostal Theological Seminary, a THM in Mission and History of Religions from Princeton Theological Seminary, and a THD in History of World Christianity from Boston University. He is currently the Associate Professor of World Christianity at George W. Truett Theological Seminary here at Baylor, and he has written a book called Justo L. Gonzalez, Missionary of Hispanic Theology in the United States. Welcome, Profe.
Nice to be here.
Yes, we're so glad to have this book, and you're reframing Justo Gonzalez as a meta-modern missionary. So not just a prolific author, but a strategist and organizer whose vocation braided incarnation, history, and mission. And it follows Gonzalez from Havana to Matanzas and to Yale, 9 formative years in Puerto Rico, to Candler in Atlanta, and then into institution building that helped form the Hispanic Theological Intelligentsia through HSP, AETH, and HTI. So you call this the first comprehensive biography of Justo L. Gonzalez. So what made you take this on, and why did it feel urgent now?
Well, Justo is a prolific writer. His 3 volumes of the history of Christian thought have been translated, Russian, Japanese, Vietnamese, you name it. His 2 volumes on the history of Christianity, the same. So everybody knows Justo Gonzalez through his historical writings. Lately, he became very engaged in theological conversations, writing a book on Hispanic theology, books on hermeneutics. So he became an intellectual, organic intellectual in a way. But the way I see him, the way I read him, is through the lenses of mission. And how he, even though he's a church historian by training, he's a missiologist. At the end of the day, he is more interested in what is going on in the world and the response that the church has to give to the world, especially, as you said, through the incarnational theology, how to be incarnational in the world. So I think that part of his life is not well known. And I think that the best way for me to understand a theologian is to go through his biography. So I am deeply interested in how people get to their conclusions through life experience. And then when you see his life, you start understanding who this person is, not just by his writings, but his life as such, as an example, and as someone to be emulated, as a disciple of Christ, as someone who went, beyond the term missionary.
Yeah.
And that's something that I emphasize in the book, that this is not a missionary from the 18th, 19th century, early 20th century. I am reframing what a missionary is.
Yeah.
So I'm taking the colonial mentality out of the picture. I'm taking the whole patriarchal, the whole thing of being paternalistic, all these kind of like claims that are associated with the word missionary. So I try to reframe it as a meta-modern missionary, a new type of missionary, a missionary that went beyond what other people had done in the past.
Yeah.
Especially him being a Cuban, how that Cuban experience as a teenager, as someone who was very, very young in seminary, shaped him to then encounter other culture in Puerto Rico, how that culture in Puerto Rico influenced him to then understand here in the USA how to be an academic at Candler School of Theology, and how the academic life was in a way unsatisfactory for him, and led him then to new projects in his life that many Hispanic students owe to him much of, for example, education in a way, because as you said there, he became an entrepreneur in a way, a theological entrepreneur, as I call him in the book, by creating these
Mm.
programs for Hispanic education, like the Hispanic Theological Initiative, the Hispanic Summer Program, the Association for Hispanic Education. That those programs were very crucial for then the development of what we know today as Latinx theology.
Yeah.
So he becomes kind of the central figure. And I think that it's important now that he's still alive to recognize him in life. That's why my book goes until 1999. So someone else will have to write the next chapter of his
Yeah.
life. But yeah, that's pretty much what I think my motivation was, and how I see him as this great guy who shaped
Mm.
Latino Christianity in the second half of the 20th century. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think you're right because he's so incarnational in his own theology and his own, like you said, the way he developed Latinx theology. It's not like he was an outsider looking in, but
Yeah.
he's an insider.
Mhm.
And so he has that perspective. And so and then you talk about him again within the context of missions
Yes.
and how he goes beyond the typical missionary model. And so you frame him as a meta modern missionary. This is your term.
Mhm.
And so, how do you define meta modern mission, and what made that lens more faithful to Justo Gonzalez's life than postmodern or other more conventional categories?
Yeah, I think that the term postmodern creates some problems. We want to definitely go beyond modernity,
Mm-hmm.
even though there are some things of modernity that are useful. We really want to move from modernity. But as Justo even said in one of his essays, the term postmodern does not break completely with modernity. And sometimes it's just an extension of modernity. And sometimes when that happens, there is really not a clear path. The other problem with postmodernity is that, for example, when Francis Lyotard argues for the elimination of a meta narrative, for example, well, that creates some problems because the knowledge that he is interested is the knowledge of the empire, the knowledge of the
Mm.
university, the knowledge of Europe, European knowledge. That creates a problem for a minoritized perspective, right? But also the other thing is that when you eliminate a meta narrative, especially the meta narrative of the Bible,
Mm.
then you are taking something from a community that has always been marginalized, and the only source of authority many times was the Bible on how to construct life according to Jesus Christ, how that story of the incarnate God shape how then people live in the world. So when you take that out, then you create this vacuum that, as Justo will argue, cannot be tolerated. So
Mm.
that's why I think that I said meta modern, in the sense that this goes beyond postmodernism. This is not postmodern. It goes beyond because we are still retaining the narrative of the Bible, not as a fundamentalist, I mean, as a text that inspires, as a
Mm.
text that can guide you, a
Yeah.
text that actually is alive and that reads back to you. Not just you reading the Bible, but how that text reads back to you. And when you create that space for the Bible to speak to your situation, I think that's powerful in the way that you will read the Bible differently.
Mm.
And one of the things I learned from Justo Gonzalez, that he was borrowing definitely from Juan Luis Segundo and his hermeneutics, is that how to read the Bible with the frame of who is powerful in the text and
Yeah.
who is powerless. So that dynamic in the text is a reconstruction of how to read the Bible through maybe a marginalized perspective, how to read the Bible from a minoritized perspective. So in other words, the Bible is still important for the Latino community. Therefore, I think that the term metamodern encapsulates better the life of Justo Gonzalez by not categorizing him in a box of postmodernism,
Yeah.
but saying that he went beyond postmodernism because he retains things that postmodernism denies that are very important for our communities. Yeah.
Yeah.
Mhm.
I think you're right. And I think it is important to make that distinction because, on the one hand, when you think of postmodernity, it is kind of throwing the baby out with the bathwater, so to speak. That, like you alluded to, it gets rid of the meta narrative of scripture. And while Husto isn't willing to get rid of that, he still isn't going to, like you said, adhere to it in the way a fundamentalist would,
Yeah.
but wants to read it from one's own experience. And for him, specifically within his own context, as, a Latino, as a theologian, and as someone who's deeply involved not only in the text but in his own community.
Yeah.
And so it becomes a reading that is grounded in
In
experience.
experience, yes,
Yeah.
you're right.
Yeah.
That's the perspective, how to read the Bible from one's own perspective.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you show how Ortega y Gasset and the critique of the Eleatic philosophy helped Gonzalez craft his historificación, history as lived, linear, communal, and theologically significant. So when do you see that concept first operationalizing in his ministry?
Very early in his life, there was this missionary, David White. He was a missionary in Cuba, and he was at Drew University, and at that time he was writing a dissertation on Ortega and Gasset. And I guess that impacted Justo greatly because his master thesis, by then it was called a Bachelor's of Divinity, was in the life and work of Ortega and Gasset, especially a critique against Eleatic philosophy.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that he embraced Ortega and Gasset in terms that he understood that, yes, me and my circumstances shape who I am and others. But I think that he went further in his critique on rationalism because he understood that vocation as such, as Ortega was claiming, will not free you
Mm-hmm.
from this shipwreck, as he called it, right? We are in a shipwreck, we are drowning, and the beauty that the ship is throwing to us is Jesus Christ, according to Gonzalez. And I think that part of Gasset, the part of rationality, was then an obstacle, and Justo criticized it in terms of it's not just me and my circumstances, but it's me, my circumstances, and everyone I come into contact with. So that makes then the concept broader, but also eliminates this thing of rationality by claiming that Jesus Christ is the Christ for others. And because Christ is the Christ for others, then as a human being, you should be for others as such. And I think that in that sense, Justo gave voice for his deepest needs of serving the Lord. Because at this time, he was kind of a teenager. I mean, he was like 18, 19 years old when
Yeah.
he went to seminary. So he was very, very young. And Ortega and Gasset, I think that formed him more than what he would admit today.
Yeah.
Yeah, because I see him then throughout his life with that kind of sense that no, it's not just me and my circumstances, but everyone that I come in contact with are my circumstances. So that was very cool to discover
Yeah.
how a philosopher can impact your life, even though you are rejecting some of the premises of his rationality, and yet you borrow from that philosopher and build your life around that principle. And it's the principle of being for others, being there for the ones who need you,
Yeah.
and how then others influence your life too.
Yeah.
So it's a mutuality
Right.
of solidarity, as I call it.
Yeah. And you kind of see that within the historification or historificación, because it's not just your own experience, but then the experience of others.
Yeah.
And so kind of we were talking about before that he's doing this theology that's grounded in your context, in your own experience. But then, like you said, he's carrying these remnants of Ortega and Gasset,
Yeah.
and those remnants are where he's kind of integrating his own experience with the experiences of others. Yeah. So you narrate Gonzalez's proximity to Martin Luther King Jr. as translator and neighbor, and how that sharpened his sense of race-class-war nexus. So what concrete shifts in Gonzalez's theology or activism do you trace to those encounters?
Yeah, that's a very cool kind of period of his life, because the Cold War was going on. Castro just won the revolution. He couldn't go back to Cuba when he graduated from Yale University. So he went to Puerto Rico as a missionary through the United Methodist Church, the Global United Methodist Church, not the global new one, but the United Methodist Church.
Yeah.
And it was in that time, that period, that the Mennonite Church invited Martin Luther King Jr. to Puerto Rico. So when Martin Luther King Jr. goes to Puerto Rico, the issue of Vietnam is in the minds of every single university and seminary student. So in Puerto Rico at that time, it was a very critical moment, a lot of turbulence going on on the island, and a very deep critique of U.S. imperialism and how the war in Vietnam should be rejected, as was rejected in Puerto Rico. The interesting thing is that at that time, Martin Luther King Jr. didn't explicitly critique the war in Vietnam.
Yeah.
He didn't even touch the subject in his lectures.
Yeah.
No, the two lectures he gave, he was more concerned on issues of race and issues dealing with the U.S. internal dynamics. And I think that in that sense, when you read his sermon on Vietnam in 1967, from my perspective, I think that Martin Luther King's own transformation began in Puerto Rico with university students, because that's the first time that he really said to the nation, hey, we are really messing up here.
Right.
People in Vietnam, we are doing things that we should not be doing there.
Yeah.
And why we have to be spending so many millions and millions and millions of dollars killing other people who had done nothing to us. So he was then there, but it took like 5 years to get there. So in 1962, he experienced the Puerto Rican student movement. And the issue is that then, on the other hand, you have Gonzalez, who just, a young Cuban who grew up seeing the United States in a way with different lenses. Justo is no Marxist.
Yeah.
Justo, he wrote a book, Revolution and Incarnation, and he definitely critiques Marxism there. So he was no Marxist. And then at the crossroads in Puerto Rico at that time, he couldn't be explicit much on his thought about it. And yet he was quite defensive of the American empire at that time. He thought that the USA wanted to bring democracy to Vietnam. So you see this back and forth between Martin Luther King Jr. and Justo Gonzalez on the issue of war, poverty, because you know that the first people who go to war are the poor.
Right.
So they were dealing with war, poverty, race, and how I think that Martin Luther King Jr. helped Gonzalez at that time to see this reality of war through the lenses of race and poverty. and to see the USA not as, Uncle Sam saving the world, but with a little more critical eyes.
Yeah.
And I think that after that encounter, Justo kind of came into his conscious of, okay, I cannot claim now that this empire is bringing democracy to Vietnam. So he became more critical. He became more aware that things are way more complicated than just saying, yeah, the USA is good because it's bringing democracy.
Yeah.
So that was a very interesting part of his life. And you see for me how that mutual transformation was taking place.
Right.
Because Martin Luther King was influenced by the student movement, by the protests in Puerto Rico, by all the things that were very, very controversial at the time, where people were jailed, where people had to spend time in jail because of their positions, where you had students at the evangelical seminary that were expelled from the school because of their politics. So it was a messy period. And in that messy period, I think that Gonzalez came to his own being on realizing, his Cubanness, how a Cuban in Puerto Rico has to see the world very, very differently, because the Puerto Rican experience helped him to see the USA with a little more critical eyes from
Yeah.
my perspective, as I read him in the documentary sources.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's so interesting because he is Cuban, as you've
Yeah.
already alluded to, and the fact that, you kind of have Justo in Cuba, and then you have Justo in the United States, and then Justo in Puerto Rico.
Yeah.
And in all three places, he's still Cuban.
Yeah.
And so that's kind of underlying in the background. And you pointed to, like, Cuba was not the place to be during this time. And so it makes sense why he then would see America as this, golden child, so to speak.
Yeah.
Like, this is, going to save the world, or however, he might have thought of it. But I think even that fact that he and Martin Luther King were kind of pushing each other to question those things, that also is part of why you can identify him as a meta-modern missionary. Because had he taken the ideals of Uncle Sam saving the world, of the U.S. to Puerto Rico, that in itself has a layer of colonialism.
Yeah.
And so the fact that he's able to look critically on that is also just a testament to his own theology and his ability to do missions in these different contexts as a Cuban, as a person who's lived in America, as a person who's lived in Puerto Rico, and to see the history, the context, the people around him, and do missions in that sense.
In that way. So it's a new way of being a missionary in the world.
Yeah.
And he will claim, actually, he told me, like, I was not actually a missionary.
Yeah.
And I said, no, you were.
You were? Yeah. No, yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
Right. And, as we said, maybe not in the traditional sense, but he was. Yeah, for sure. Well, the book names the underrepresentation of women in early cohorts. So he kind of develops these, organizations, these cohorts. And so how did Gonzalez and his colleagues address gender equality, and what still remains undone?
Slowly, slowly, as the book claims, this was a slow process. As you know, in the 1970s, the feminist movement came into full swing in the USA, and his wife, Catherine Gonzalez, was not a hardcore feminist as such,
Yeah.
but definitely she was not anti-feminist. And you can say that she had a soft feminism, not like Maridali, but kind of softer feminism.
Right.
I think that she influenced him greatly when it came the conversation, the topic of woman in ministry, even though the Methodist Church had always had woman in ministry, and that tradition. And his mother was a minister, Justo's mother.
Yeah.
So he kind of understood that part, but it took some time for the Latino ex-church, especially the religious intelligentsia, to mold and develop female leaders. When you see then the first female leaders, like Ada Maria Isasi Mujerista Theology. Well, he wrote her dissertation quite late in the 90s, and her theology then blossomed from there.
Yeah.
You see someone as Daisy Machado also writing at the same time their dissertations. But you don't see a leader as such in the organizations that he created, a female leader. For the Hispanic Summer Program, I think that it took like 12 years
Wow.
for Daisy Machado, who is still today, I think that she's retiring this year,
Yeah.
to be the director of the Hispanic Summer Program.
Right.
In the Hispanic Theological Initiative, I think that by 1997, things were better. And we have, again, Daisy Machado as the first executive director. And right after her, we have Saida Perez. And then you see then the involvement of women ministers, of theologians in the academia. One of the interesting things that you are mentioning is that the Hispanic Summer Program served as kind of this place where the first feminist theologians, mujerista theologians, whatever you want to call them, from a Latinx perspective, develop.
Yeah.
So you have these ladies doing PhD work and then testing their ideas that were pretty much attuned with liberation theologians, Gutierrez and Segundo, all these people, both. So you have this generation, the generation of the 1990s, opening up spaces for women scholars.
Yeah.
And you see that clearly how the Hispanic Summer Program opened that space for females to start teaching. And from there, now we have, I think that we are very well represented when it comes to women's leadership in academia. We have many professors who went through the
Yeah.
Hispanic Summer Program, who
Right.
went through the Hispanic Theological Initiative, these projects that were created by Gonzalez. So I think that it was a process,
Right.
and sometimes it was a long process, but I think that we are there
Yeah.
in that sense. I think that Joanne Rodriguez, for example, she's still the director of the Hispanic Theological Initiative, more than 20 years. So you see there with her a great leader shaping that program until today.
Yeah.
So yeah. It was a space that was created because of the programs that he created.
Yeah. And it sounds like even before there were maybe female leaders, it was still a space for women to do theology
Yeah.
and to start exploring those things. And so, although it was a long process for women to come to leadership, they were still there in that space
Yes.
doing theology. Yeah. Very cool. Well, you argue that Gonzalez embraced liberation theologies while maintaining a distinctively incarnational historical center.
Yeah.
So, where does he most converge with and also diverge from Latin American liberation theology?
Yeah, I think that he saw Latin American liberation theology as an all-encompassing system, meaning that pretty much he defended liberation theology. He was completely on board with the preferential option for the poor.
Yeah.
He was on board with some type of hermeneutics of suspicion following Segundo, as I said. So he was pretty much, a dialogue partner
Yeah.
with Latin American theologians. I think that you see the cross-fertilization the most in his hermeneutics.
Right.
Yeah, because Gonzalez is a Bible person.
Yeah.
He's a biblical human being. So as I told you before, you see that convergence there on how to read the Bible from the perspective of the poor, the oppressed, and then to read always the text with this suspicion of, okay, who had the power here, who is powerless, and then how that can be correlated, right? Because he always used this correlation. How can those experiences in the Bible could be correlated to our own experiences as Latinos, Latinas here in the United States?
Yeah.
So I think that was part of how he appropriated liberation theology. I think that probably one of the differences will be that, as I said before, he was no Marxist.
Yeah.
He avoided, using that type of terminology. But it's interesting because in 1981, he wrote an article. And in that article, he was arguing that we have to construct this reality through race and culture. But then he said that we still need class struggle to interpret the Latino community. And that was surprising
Yeah.
because, yeah, that's actually the first time that I read something like that in his life.
Right.
And it was just a one moment thing.
Yeah.
Because he never came back.
Never came back
no,
to
no,
it.
No,
Yeah.
no, no. He
Yeah.
never came back to that argument.
Right.
But he opened the doors for the next generation to be critical of capitalism, to be critical of how capitalism influences decisions, on how capitalism actually creates poverty by excluding, right? An economy of exclusion. So I think that in that sense, he gave, as a way, he gave permission to the younger generation to be a little more transgressive. It's interesting too, because when you read Latino Roman Catholic theology, they have this inverse of the phrase, a preferential option for the poor.
Yeah.
So they inverted to a preferential option for culture. And that for me is one of those interesting shifts
Right.
on how people construct theology. I think that, they are doing great job. They're great work, whatever they are doing. But also culture is quite limiting sometimes. And as you know, cultures are always evolving.
Yeah.
Cultures are not static. So how to do a Latino theology when you have, for example, Asians intermarrying, Puerto Ricans, Asians intermarrying Mexicans. Where now is that culture, how that culture is shaped now, where you have kimchi in your house instead of tortillas, right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
it's this sense of, yes, it's great, but then it's expanding. So we cannot kind of claim a purist
Right.
kind of Latinx culture, right? So I think that in the future, I think that one of those dreams that I have as a scholar is that I want to write on the life of Hilke Lammert, because Frank Hinker Lammert is this German economist that goes to Latin America and start working in the communities of base, start working with the poor and the oppressed, have conversations, start dialogue with liberation theologians, and then becomes probably the most prolific theologian, not being a theologian,
Yeah.
on economical issues, on economics.
Yeah.
So he's someone that I would love to spend 5 years, because he had a huge corpus. But then to bring that critique of a critique against the market, a critique against neoliberalism, how then that will look like coming from a USA perspective, from a Latino perspective.
Yeah.
I think that Gonzalez gave us permission in a way to do what should be done. And I think that probably this new generation, the younger generation, that will be less attached to the shackles of institutionalism, could break free
Yeah.
of also the fear, and more now in the USA that to say that you are a Marxist is kind of a death sentence on you, how things are going here sometimes, right? And Marxism is used as this boogeyman, that is going to come and take you at night or whatever.
Yeah.
But I think that a critique should be done from a Latino perspective.
Yeah.
And how Latino culture, Latino communities are affected by the market and the invisible hand of the market, right, as they call it.
Yeah.
So that would be a nice project in the future that I hope I can have the strength to do another biography.
Yes.
Now with Franz Hickelhammer. Yeah.
Well, and it's interesting because you alluded to this earlier, but Justo Gonzalez is so rooted in the Bible.
Yeah.
He's, he has his book Santa Biblia, like he's very rooted in the text. But like you said, he also is exploring. We already said experience, culture, economics. Like he's kind of have his hand in all these pots, and I think it just goes back to what we said at the very beginning, that he's so incarnational, that it's about how the scripture affects all these other aspects of life, and he just does that so well, blending it all together.
Yeah, and that actually he wrote a book in '94 on the use of money in the early church.
Really?
Yes. So that's a very provocative book too, on how he shows that actually money, theology, economics was a theological aspect for the early church fathers.
Right.
So it was not peripheral. It was just it was part of the tradition on how to do theology. So I think that that book is also critical on how we use money today.
Yeah, that's interesting. Well, if I'm remembering correctly, you lived with him for a time.
Not live, but I was his guest.
You were his guest, yeah. Do you have a favorite memory of Justo Gonzalez?
Yes, of course. I mean, you will be surprised that Justo and Catherine, when they are not watching the baseball season, they love baseball. Justo loves baseball, the Atlanta Braves.
Really?
Yeah. They go to sleep after watching this French show, Inspector Migret. That is about mystery, about like solving mystery killings and stuff like that. And then they also see Murder, She Wrote. And then they are trying to figure out, no, he killed her.
They're
no,
solving
he killed
the
her.
crimes.
Yeah, they are solving the crime.
I love it.
And it's like, oh my God, these people are going to sleep solving a crime.
Yeah.
This is wild. So that was very kind of cool to see them in that dynamic. Like, let's go and watch, a thriller kind of, and let's solve the crime.
Right.
So that was something kind of cool to see these two big theologians, historians talking about, he did that.
You're like, have this high respect for them, and then they're just watching murder mysteries before bed. Oh, I love that. That's awesome. Well, thank you so much for your faithful scholarship and your work on this book, this biography, and for joining us today on the podcast.
Pleasure be here.
Yeah, thanks so much. And for our listeners and our viewers, we hope that you will purchase Justo L. Gonzalez, Missionary of Hispanic Theology in the United States by Angel Santiago Vendrell today at BaylorPress.com. Thank you, Dr. Vendrell.
Thank you. Bye.
Yeah. Thank you for listening to Et Al., a podcast from Baylor University Press. We hope you've enjoyed today's episode. Make sure to like, comment, and subscribe to keep up with the latest from Et Al.